The metal shutter groaned as he dragged it upward, rust grinding against rust, the kind of noise that echoed like protest from something forgotten. Dust shifted in the beam of daylight that cut through the half-open doorway, revealing shelves lined with broken boxes and faded price tags. You could almost smell neglect itself, mildew mixed with old paper. A curious inheritance, they had called it in the lawyer's office. But standing there now, his hand still gripping the chain of the shutter, the single dad felt less like he'd been handed a gift, and more like he'd been given another burden. He was tired already. Tired of working 2 jobs, tired of packing lunches on borrowed time, and tired of trying to convince his child that everything would be fine when bills kept whispering otherwise. When the news came that his late father had left him something, a store tucked away on a quiet street, he needed it to be hope. But looking at cracked linoleum beneath his shoes, at dead flies on the windowsill, all he saw was proof that life wasn't giving him breaks, only more to patch over. He slipped the key into the lock and closed the shutter again. The sound echoed in the empty space, a hollow slam, lifeless. There were no customers, no waiting opportunity. Just a dusty register by the door, shelves sagging under the weight of inventory that looked bought decades ago. He lifted a warped board from the counter and found nothing beneath but more dust, as if the store had been abandoned halfway through a sigh and sealed off from life. Something was odd, though. As he moved behind the counter, the floor creaked in an uneven rhythm. One board dipped sharper than the others. He pressed down, listening. Hollow. The kind of hollow that carries sound farther than it should. And along the western wall, the one lined with empty hooks, the plaster curved slightly inward, as if hiding a secret between wall and shadow. He stood still, listening. That's when he heard it. Soft taps, almost like a knock, though faint. He froze. Could be pipes, he told himself. Could be rats. He wanted to believe one more than the other. He shook the uneasy feeling off, unwilling to drown in another mystery he couldn't solve. His child counted on him for simple answers, for stability. The store, as it stood, offered none of that. It looked worthless, and in many ways it seemed worse than nothing. Maintenance would cost money he didn't have. Property tax would bite deeper into an already shallow pocket. He whispered under his breath, "Thanks, Dad." The words stuck like ash. He rummaged through drawers near the register, searching for anything. Old paperwork, maybe, receipts, insurance, something. Instead, he found slips of yellowed paper curling at the edges. A rough sketch of shelving, scribbles that faded fast. And, lodged in the back corner of the drawer, wedged behind splinters, he found a small, old iron key. Strange shape, no label, worn smooth on one side, sharp ridges on the other. He stood there with it in his palm, turning it in the dim light. It had weight, the kind of weight that suggested use, yet no lock in sight seemed to call for it. He tried it on the drawer itself, too large. The front door, too small. The filing cabinet in the corner wouldn't even slide in. It belonged somewhere, but not anywhere obvious. He looked again at that crooked wall, at the uneven dip of floorboards, and felt something cold sit in the pit of his stomach. The store was worthless. That much still rang true. But maybe what had been passed down wasn't just shelves and debts. Maybe the store itself was pretending. Stay with me for the full story, because what came next would test not just how far curiosity could carry him, but how deeply fear could settle in. Only days earlier, he'd sat in that lawyer's office, trying not to look restless while a man in a navy suit read from papers with a flat voice. His father's name was spoken plainly, without affection, as if it belonged firmly to the past. The inheritance, a property listed as retail commercial, along with whatever contents were in the building. A small sum of insurance, too, barely enough to cover probate fees. No warm letters, no explanation, just names on paper, transfers signed, hands shaken. That's how his father, absent most of his life, had managed to linger, by scrawling one final gesture on legal forms. It would have felt easier had there been nothing. He carried a complicated weight in his chest. Grief that wouldn't form because a bond never grew. Resentment carved into old memories of being left at baseball games or holidays planned then abandoned. And over all of that, guilt, because a child now waited for him at home, and he lived with that constant fear of repeating everything he'd hated his own father for. It didn't take long for the curse to feel real. By the second day, he'd tallied a brief inventory. Mismatched cans of food, long expired. Stacks of magazines nobody would buy. Boxes of discount dishware gone dull and gray. He called collectors, wholesalers, even scrap buyers. Nobody wanted any of it. The few who did only offered insultingly small sums, not enough to cover what the electric company demanded by the end of the week. He kept walking through aisles that once promised customers but only gathered dust. The power flickered when he plugged in an ancient register. The heating unit whined and then clicked dead. Every fault tallied like a debt in his head. His child deserved stability, and instead he was now tethered to a relic, a property already sinking into disrepair. Nights were a tug-of-war between biting frustration and weary silence, with him sitting on kitchen steps while his child slept upstairs. He'd swear under his breath, wondering why his father insisted on handing him this, the store, instead of apologies. But in those dusty corners, discoveries lurked. An old ledger sat behind the counter, cracked leather giving way to fragile paper. He opened it slowly, expecting notes of sales, lists of goods. Some pages fit that description, totals inked in lazy loops, customer marks, inventory numbers. Then, many pages were empty, gaps where there shouldn't have been. Dates skipped, weeks gone missing. Flipping further, he saw faint handwriting pressed harder into the paper. Back storage, written again. Then growing more elaborate, back storage reserved, on a date that should have been decades before. Problem was, no such back storage existed. He'd walked through the space 3 times. A narrow front shop room, a storage area in the rear with shelving nailed crooked, and a small bathroom. No back storage. At least, not visible. He read it again, slower, like the words themselves might bleed out meaning with patience. But they only sat there, taunting. It twisted in him, this odd combination of fear and curiosity. If his father had been absent in life, maybe he had left something else, something strange, hidden in his work. A puzzle, or a secret, or both. And though resentment swelled in him, so did something else. A temptation. If the store held no value on the books, maybe somewhere beneath the veneer of dust and decay hid something worth holding on to. Or at least something that explained why his father guarded this place until passing it on. Still, none of that erased the heavy truth. He had bills waiting, a child asking if dinner would be big tomorrow. He faced choices he hadn't earned the luxury of delaying. Selling was tempting. The property records suggested he could maybe find a buyer willing to pay for land, tear the building down, start fresh. He pictured running from it all, shedding off his father's mess, simplifying life to only what he could control. The other path was harder, keeping the store, patching what he could, and hoping those gaps in ledgers and that uncanny key hinted at something buried worth enduring for. He set the ledger down beside that strange iron key. Two objects from a man he never understood. A ledger that lied by omission. A key that resisted every lock. He felt caught between quitting before it began or carrying forward blind. Any rational decision said, walk away. But then he pictured what it would mean for his child. One more inconstant choice, one more disappointment passed down. So he inhaled, slow, and whispered the kind of choice that felt heavier than brick or mortar. I'll keep it. Not with certainty, not with optimism, but because abandoning it meant abandoning the faint possibility that some sliver of inheritance, just this once, could mean more than a curse. He arrived early the next morning, before the street stirred. The store sat silent, the shutters pulling light only in thin strips across the floor. He didn't even bother with the register. Instead, he brought a small box, a flashlight, and a notebook. Tools of someone who had chosen or been chosen to keep a place alive. He told himself he was simply cataloging what had been left behind. Truth was, he was searching. For what, he wasn't sure. A reason, perhaps. A trace of meaning that justified staying. The air felt thicker that day, heavy with dust, disturbed by his movements. The first corner he cleared yielded yellowed newspapers, tied bundles collapsing in flakes. He noted dates, circled years gone missing in that ledger. Some months had full sets of papers, then entire seasons vanished. His father was careless with many things, but he was never careless with patterns. That realization stuck with him. Something had been hidden in how records were kept. Or erased. Beneath loose boards in a storage shelf, his fingers found a wooden box barely wide enough to hold more than a few papers. Inside lay scraps, receipts torn in half, folded slips with numbers and mundane notes. But one caught his attention. Written in hurried hand. Floor mark under west wall. He frowned, glancing at the wall that had already unsettled him days before. West wall. The crooked one. He tore the slip free, pocketed it, and felt his unease return. That day was not spent in sales, but in searching. He tapped on corners, ran his hand along edges, whispered questions no one answered. And slowly, hints surfaced. A shelf that rested uneven, as though nailed against a space too tight. A line etched faintly at the baseboard, where paint looked newer, layered in uneven strokes. He traced it. It aligned almost exactly with the curve he had noticed, a curve too deliberate to be natural. Late afternoon, while he wasn't watching, his child tugged at his sleeve. "Dad, what's this?" he asked, small finger pointing near the floorboards. He crouched and followed the finger to a tiny cluster of marks. Carved, not accidental. Simple shapes, repeated. A circle crossed by a line, then another circle, half faded. He had overlooked them in his weariness, mistaking them for scuffs. But looking closer, he felt certain they were deliberate. Children see what adults ignore. That truth sank deep. He forced a smile, told his child it was probably someone doodling long ago. But inside he felt his chest tighten. These were not doodles. They were signs. As night came, the store changed. Heat withdrew, replaced by chill. Metal frames creaked. Dust settled like whispers. He spent long hours filing finds into his notebook, connecting slips of paper with ledgers, broken patterns with etched marks. And then the noises began again. Taps, faint, irregular, like someone far away striking pipe with bone. He held his child close when the sound grew sharper, echoing from floor. The logical explanations, rats, wind, buildings settling, fell short. He had heard buildings shift before. This sound had intent. The next morning, driven and unslept, he cleared the farthest shelf along the back wall. Boxes of unsellable junk clattered aside. Beneath them, half concealed by grime, wood panels lay darker than those around. When he pressed, they gave slightly, sounding hollow, like a drum. His pulse picked pace. He stepped back, staring at the patch where everything converged, the wall that curved, the marks carved, the hollow wood beneath. With careful effort, he pried free what looked like ordinary floorboard. It resisted, swollen by years, but finally shifted. Dust erupted upward, bitter smell filling his throat. Beneath, in shadowed gap, he saw iron, flat and square. He scraped grime with his hand and revealed a seam, metal edges that framed something rectangular. A trapdoor, sealed down by layers of nailed wood and paint. His hand instinctively reached for the key still resting in his pocket. The weight pressed against his palm, accusing. He knelt there for long minutes, heart loud in the quiet. The lock mechanism, if there was one, remained hidden under that sealed square. He traced edges that refused to open without deeper effort. The key might belong here, or it might not. That night, after tucking his child into bed, he returned with resolve. Flashlight in teeth, he hammered gently at nailed wood. Boards yielded slowly, thudding as they pulled away. He expected a cavity, maybe rotten beams. Instead, a faint iron hinge breathed into the open air, attached to the sealed hatch. Decades of shut silence now stood inches from giving way. He stopped himself at the final pull. Breathing ragged, chest heaving with both thrill and dread, he imagined treasure. He imagined nothing. He imagined worse than nothing, something left behind with reason. He leaned back, staring at the closed hatch, refusing to open it then. Not yet. His child stirred in the next room, and suddenly he knew some doors demand timing, not impatience. So he laid the boards gently back in place, covering them clumsily. His hands trembled. He would not pry open what hid in dust tonight. But the truth pressed forward with certainty. The store's worth was not on shelves. It rested in silence, in something locked below. And the key, burning weight against his skin, promised that sooner or later it would turn. He returned to the store on a damp morning, rain tapping lightly against the emptied windows, as though the sky itself was trying to hurry him forward. His child was at school, safely gone for the day, and that gave him permission to lean into the unease. He didn't bother switching on the buzzing fluorescent lights. Instead, he worked in shadows and in silence. The shelves cleared the night before still stood hollow, leaving the far wall accessible. His hands trembled not just from fatigue, but from expectancy, the sense of something about to change. He knelt by the dislodged boards and carefully lifted them out once more. Dust coughed from their edges, settling slowly in the stillness of the shop. The iron frame beneath looked darker than he remembered, edges so sharp they cut contrast against the wood around it. He brushed away more debris and found a small indentation beside the seam, no larger than a coin. His chest tightened. With slow breath, he slid the worn iron key from his pocket. The grooved ridges seemed to align too perfectly with that strange slot. For a long moment he hesitated, weighing the decision. The key was more than metal now. It was a fork in his own life. On one hand, he could slide it back into hiding, pretend he had never seen this, let the store remain useless. On the other, he could press forward, opening something his father clearly meant not everyone to enter. He thought of his child, of the hungry questions at breakfast, of the bills pushed under doors demanding money that did not exist. Secrets would not pay those, but maybe what lay down there would. He pressed the key into the slot. It resisted at first, as though it had been waiting too long, but then it slid forward with a satisfying click. Metal against metal in a whisper of recognition. He turned it slowly. A low grinding began, brittle and tired, and the sealed hatch released a gasp of stale air that smelled of stone and iron. He coughed, the dust clinging bitter in his throat, but pressed on, pulling the latch up until the square door cracked open. Darkness loomed beneath. Not the kind of darkness that comes with shadow, but the kind that carries weight, pressing upward like water against glass. He tipped his flashlight forward. The beam revealed wood framing at first, then rough stone descending into a narrow space. A simple ladder ran down into the black, rungs eaten by time. The air rolling upward felt cooler, tinged with something metallic, almost like blood but older, fractured by echoes you couldn't name. His pulse throbbed. He forced himself to climb down, one step at a time. Every rung creaked, groaning sharply under his weight. He feared collapse, yet somehow they held. When his feet finally met stone floor, he turned slowly in the beam of the flashlight. The chamber stretched wider than expected, built deep under the storefront. Stacked along the walls were wooden crates, their tops pried but left crooked, revealing glimpses of tarnished coins and fabric strips wrapped around sealed jars. Dust lay thick over everything, a quiet shroud. His hand reached toward the nearest crate. The wood flaked when he touched it. Inside sat a cluster of coins, dull but heavy, their shapes unfamiliar. He lifted one, cool against his palm. Time had gnawed at its surface, yet letters still ran the edge in an alphabet he couldn't place. He felt a thrill rush up his arm. It was not trash. It was not worthless. And still, part of him recoiled. Because objects like this do not linger forgotten unless someone meant them to. He flashed the light further and saw more. Carved boxes bound by rope, small clay vessels capped in wax, and, near the far wall, a chest of iron flecked with rust. He took slow steps toward it. His breath echoed louder with every pace, though no sound except his existed. When he reached it, he crouched down and ran fingers across the cool metal. Locked tight, shut long enough that the hinges looked sealed by corrosion. He tugged at it, but it refused, as though reminding him nothing would open without patience. Beside the chest, however, lay loose papers. He picked one up with care. It was brittle, edges crumbling. Faded handwriting sprawled across in hurried script. Words blurred from damp, but enough remained. For those who follow. He stared, heart quickening. His father's name didn't appear, yet this chamber seemed connected to lineage, a tether stitched through generations and left purposely beneath a worthless store. He realized then his inheritance was not a mistake of law, not a cruel joke by a neglectful man. It was deliberate, a placement, a test. He lowered himself to sit on the cold floor, treasure scattered before him, and tried to breathe evenly. Wonder filled him. Coins that had outlived kings, objects that spoke in languages no longer read. Fear pressed harder. What if discovery drew the wrong eyes? What if keeping any of it marked him for danger he couldn't guard against? He pictured his child bounding in through the doorway, asking what he was doing. Innocence colliding with secrets meant for shadows. His responsibility weighed heavier than the coin in his hand. The chamber whispered possibilities. Sell it and rescue their lives from debt. Hide it and carry the secret alone forever. Seek origin and risk strangers circling closer. Every choice carried consequence. He glanced again at the chest sealed in rust. Something greater lurked inside. He could sense it. But for now he stood, forcing himself to climb the ladder back into daylight. He replaced the hatch gently, laid boards to cover it once more, and sat on the store floor, inhaling air cleaner than below. He had opened the way. He had seen what lay beneath, and he knew the store was never worthless. It was a doorway, and with it came a question not yet answered. Would he claim what waited, or would he bury it back into silence? He couldn't sleep. The discovery below the shop pressed against his thoughts like a pulse that wouldn't slow. Each time he closed his eyes, images returned. The coins, the locked chest, the brittle papers whispering in languages he didn't know. By morning, he looked at the store differently, not as a skeleton of debt, but as a shell guarding something far older and far heavier. The problem was, treasure rarely comes unguarded. Even in silence, he felt the risk. Wealth and relics of that magnitude had gravity, and he wondered how long it would take before that pull drew others. When his child skipped down the steps that morning, rubbing sleep from their eyes, they asked why Dad looked so awake so early. He almost told the truth, almost shared the secret waiting only feet beneath their lives. But fear sealed his mouth. Instead, he cooked simple breakfast and listened to innocent chatter. Only when his child looked up with wide eyes and said, "Maybe the store isn't so bad. Maybe it's magic," did he freeze mid-bite. He forced a laugh, but inside, the words rang truer than they should. Later that day, he stood inside the shop again. Flashlight pointed into the hatch he hadn't dared open fully. His fingers brushed the edges of the hidden crates, and this time he paid closer attention. Each artifact seemed placed with intent. Coins from different eras, jars whose wax seals appeared untouched, maps rolled tightly but layered in dust. One fragile, leather-bound journal sat near the iron chest, cover warped by age. Clearing grime from the front revealed no title, just an emblem. Two intersecting circles crossed by a single vertical line. Familiar. He had seen it where his child had pointed near the floorboards. He opened the fragile binding, and words flared across faded ink. Names, not people he knew, but dates and references he recognized from ledgers above ground. Crossed notes like "shipment diverted," and beneath it, initials of men long dead. The entries felt less like financial records and more like warnings disguised as routine. "Storefront safe," one line read. Another, reserved for later generations. His chest tightened. The discovery wasn't merely a hidden stash. It was orchestrated, chosen, perhaps protected by those who ensured it reached him. Carrying the journal back upstairs, he sat behind the counter and imagined what his late father had known. Old resentments burned again. Was this why the man withheld love? Why he traded family dinners for nights guarding silence? If so, why hand it off without instructions, without words to guide? The only answer that surfaced was burden. His father had carried it, and in death he had pushed it onto the next set of shoulders. No permission asked, no apology offered. Unease grew sharper when he returned below at dusk. In the pale dust that lined the chamber floor, he saw something new. Footprints. Small at first, he thought they might be his own repeated, but closer look showed otherwise. A pair leading to the chest's corner, edges firm, not his shoe ridges. Someone else had stepped here, recently. His stomach dropped. He shone the light across every surface. Coins still lay scattered, crates still sealed, but the dust trails did not lie. The treasure below was no longer secret just to him. "Did you go down there?" he later asked his child quietly, half hoping for a response. The child shook their head innocently, distracted by crayons at the table. Relief swelled, but paranoia bloomed larger. If not his child, then who? The store remained locked each night, yet old locks invite old keys, and secrets attract seekers you never see until shadows bear their faces. His nights turned restless. He placed extra planks over the hatch and leaned heavy crates across the boards. He told himself it was just protection from rodents or decay, but the truth left his chest shaking. He feared human hands, not nature. Imagining strangers in the chamber beneath his store, while he and his child slept above, sent fire into his veins. One night, as street lamps hummed outside and the town had long folded itself quiet, the silence fractured. A knock at the store door. Not frantic, not hurried. 3 deliberate taps. He sat upright from thin sleep, listening. A second round of knocks followed, firmer. He rose, heart hammering, stepping softly so as not to wake his child. The glass pane of the front door reflected his own face back at him, pale under moonlight. Beyond glass stood a figure, blurred by darkness. Not moving, not waving, only waiting. He did not open. He pressed his back against the counter, waited until silence returned. Then, slow footsteps receded down the street, fading. He remained in the dark shop long after, every breath shallow. Whoever it was hadn't left a note, hadn't spoken words. They had only asked entry with those 3 measured knocks. Maybe a passerby, maybe more. But the timing, only days after finding footprints in dust, scraped too close to coincidence. By dawn, he chose differently. He brought the journal upstairs and placed it in a locked cabinet. Then he returned to the hidden room only once, this time carrying a tarp. He covered coins, sealed maps again, pressed dust across disturbed floors. He closed the hatch with hands trembling and vowed not to descend for a while. Treasure may promise freedom, but right now, it felt like shackles pulling him under. As his child bounded into the shop later and asked if they could help arrange shelves, he forced a smile. Maybe someday he would share the truth, maybe never. What mattered was safety. Some inheritances arrive gilded, others cursed. His was both. And already the weight of that hidden fortune threatened to bend his back further than years of hard work ever had. The store above might look worthless to anyone passing by, but beneath boards, beneath stone, a different story slept, and someone else knew it now. The next evening, while dusk stained the windows orange, the knock returned. 3 taps, slow and heavy, carrying through the store like a drumbeat meant only for him. He froze with a broom in his hand, palms slicking with sweat. His child was upstairs this time, happily singing to themselves, unaware of the sound that quickened his heartbeat below. He stood still, broom half raised, rehearsing silence as though it might shield them both. When he dared to look, the figure outside wasn't blurred this time. A man in dark coat and hat leaned patiently against the doorway glass, gazing inside as though cataloging every corner of the deserted store. Instead of knocking again, the man smiled faintly, a gesture colder than the autumn air curling under the door. The dad considered leaving it unanswered, but ignoring only seemed to swell the weight of that presence. So he opened the glass halfway, chain still clasped. His voice cracked a little. "We're closed." "Of course," the man said easily. "I wasn't here for shopping. I've heard this building might be for sale. Thought I'd ask the owner myself." His words felt rehearsed, each syllable neat. The dad stiffened. Few people even remembered the store existed, let alone wanted it. The supposed interest landed strange. He managed, "Not for sale yet." Silence stretched between them. The man's eyes flicked briefly toward the counter, then to the back wall, as if he already knew the geography within. Then he said, "Places like this hold charm. Shadows. History. Worth a great deal to the right buyer." Something in the way he spoke of shadows made the single dad's skin crawl. He forced a polite nod, then closed the door slowly, chain still in place. The man did not protest, did not step away, only tipped his hat slightly before strolling down the street. Footsteps faded, yet tension clung like static long after. He locked both shutters and bolts that night, listened for movement. Sleep refused him, and in that sleepless dark, questions swarmed. How much did that man know? How did he even find out about the store? And why had his eyes lingered, not at shelves, but toward the west wall beneath which secrets trembled? At dawn, he dug out the brittle journals he had carried upstairs days before. The handwriting scrawled across parchment chilled him now, because buried among shipping lists and faint sketches were notes he had skimmed but not connected. Phrases like, "watchers among us," and "they return if guarded poorly." His finger traced the sentences, lips whispering the words. He wondered if his father had scribbled them, or someone further back along their bloodline. He flipped deeper, pages cracking in protest. Then his eyes widened. There, dated generations ago, a line that read, "Leave behind for heir, but beware. Others claim it as theirs also." That word, others, burned in his head. By blood, the store and chamber were passed to him. But perhaps rivals, shadows through generations, had waited too. The man at his door had not come by chance. This realization dug hard into him. The treasure was more than objects. It was part of a lineage cloaked in silence. He thought again of his father, the man who'd failed birthdays yet carried these secrets. Maybe neglect hadn't been mere cruelty. Maybe guarding the burden had left no room for fatherhood. The thought carved both sympathy and anger into his chest. Meanwhile, His child tugged on his sleeve that morning, holding up a drawing. "Us in the store," they said cheerfully. Crayon colors sprawled crooked shelves, a smiling figure labeled Dad, another smaller labeled Me. Above them, though, the child had added something else. A dark figure outside the window, hat pulled low. "Who's this?" he asked carefully. "I saw a man through the glass last night," the child replied innocently. Was he a customer? His breath caught. He crouched low, pulling his child close gently. "Just someone passing. Nobody to worry about." The lie burned on his tongue, but truth would only bring fear. Still, their eyes searched his face with quiet suspicion, like they somehow knew more. As days passed, paranoia laced every hour. Every creak felt intruder. Every shadow stretching over display cases became a threat. He placed locks on windows he'd ignored, swept floors each sunrise to check if dust patterns had shifted. Sometimes they had, though he couldn't prove it. He thought of escape, selling, running, leaving, but memory of those journals chained him tighter. This wasn't just material wealth, it was legacy thickened by secrecy. If he ran, he abandoned both treasure and truth. Yet staying meant opening himself to forces circling unseen. He balanced fear with duty, knowing each choice stained him in different ways. Late one evening, journals spread before him again. He connected pieces he had missed. Names repeated, initials tied to shipments, clues to kin long dead, and faint sketches of the emblem his child noticed on floorboards. A circle crossed through. Beside it read, "Blood carries mark forward." He sat, frozen, the words choking him. This wasn't a random store chosen to hide artifacts. It was a vault woven into a family curse or vow. His father didn't choose him. Inheritance demanded him. The knock hadn't returned for several nights, but the silence itself felt heavier. The unseen buyer hadn't gone away. He waited, perhaps waiting for weakness. The dad paced floors like a sentinel, each motion fueled by near-feral fear for the child upstairs. One night, he paused mid-stride. His reflection gazed back from the darkened window glass. He hardly recognized himself. Unshaven, eyes ringed by sleepless hours, back bent not from age, but from carrying secrets he never asked for. Behind his own reflection, faint at first, he imagined he saw that figure again, hat cocked just so. He snapped the curtains shut. In bed later, his child nestled close, mumbling a question before sleep fully claimed them. "Dad, are we safe?" He swallowed, throat tight. Every part of him screamed to answer yes, to anchor his child in innocence. Instead, the words stayed silent. He pressed a hand against their hair and let silence be the shield, because promises he couldn't guarantee felt more dangerous than quiet. Still, the question lingered in him long into the night. Safety was no longer simple. It had shadows, history, watchers past and present, and in the middle of it stood one man, unwilling heir, torn between sheltering his child and shielding a secret whose gravity stretched beyond his own life. The past pressed closer, ghosts shifting into present form, and he realized soon, very soon, the choice between legacy and safety would demand his full hand. He woke before dawn, unable to stay still. The store seemed to whisper to him even in dreams, a low hum pressing against his ribs until he gave up on sleep entirely. By the time the sun cracked pale across the street, He was already inside, staring at the trapdoor he swore he wouldn't touch again. His resolve to protect his child clashed with another sharp craving, the need to know more. The iron key dug into his palm as though reminding him of its purpose. He knelt, hands on the hatch, and pushed until it yielded again. The air that rose was no less cold than before, yet it felt different somehow, sharper, impatient. He climbed down and this time carried not just a flashlight, but a canvas sack. He thought, if I can bring something up, maybe I can test the weight of this inheritance. See if it can buy more than sleepless nights. At first, it seemed simple. A crate of coins nearest the ladder looked easy to lift, but when he tugged, wood groaned and held fast. Even sliding the crate across the floor proved impossible. It might as well have been nailed to stone. He pried the lid further open, scooping only a handful of coins into the sack. Their chill clink stung his ears. The sack grew heavy far faster than he expected, straps biting into his shoulder when he tried to lift. Greedy thoughts cracked against reality as the weight nearly toppled him backward. Frustrated, he shifted to a smaller box, one bound in rope. The moment he tried unfastening it, the brittle cord snapped and the corner of the box split. Inside lay delicate glass objects, some cloudy, some clear, each etched with lines that shimmered faintly, even under dust. He froze, breath caught. These were not things you shove into bags. One wrong move, and centuries could shatter at his fingertips. He placed the lid back gently, hands trembling. Climbing back up with only a few coins scraped together, he sat panting on the store floor. Anger pressed in. This treasure wasn't meant to be carted off like scrap metal. His father, or whoever built this vault, had curated it with strange care. It was too heavy, too fragile, too stubborn, almost as if designed to resist theft while testing persistence. Later that morning, his child wandered into the store, lunchbox in hand. They spotted the open sack and peeked in before he could stop them. Coins winked up in dull metallic light. "Where'd you get these?" they asked with innocent wonder. He snapped the bag shut. "Found them in a box," he muttered too quickly, already regretting it. Their eyes searched him, questions bubbling. "Is it from Grandpa? Does this mean we're rich?" The questions struck like blows. He forced a smile, shaking his head. "Just old junk. Not worth much." The lie tasted sour, and guilt spread instantly, because the wide-eyed hope on his child's face dimmed. Still, he couldn't tell them the truth. Safety demanded silence, even at the cost of trust. That night, guilt returned heavier than the coin sack. He dug through the journal again, as if looking for absolution. Instead, he found between faded entries a sheet folded tighter than the rest. He smoothed it carefully and saw lines of lettering intertwined with symbols, curves and slashes echoing the carvings along the floorboards. A code. His father's notes hinted at shipments and storages, but this page felt different. At the bottom corner, a faint sketch resembled stairs spiraling downward. Beneath it, one single phrase remained clear. The deeper chamber. The words lit fire in his skull. What he'd seen so far wasn't final. Beneath crates and coins lay another level, another chamber hidden further away. His breath shook. A map to more than he already feared. Conflicting voices battered him through that long night. Take what you can now, sell it, save your child, or Dig deeper. Follow the code. Maybe uncover a legacy larger than debt could measure. Each choice rattled with risk. No easy. When his child asked before bed, "Dad, are we gonna be okay?" He nodded too quickly, another lie tumbling out with a smile that didn't feel real. Lying had become habit, not because he wanted to, but because the truth threatened to crush them both under its weight. Alone, he laid the coded page beside the iron key. They seemed to stare back, daring him. One symbol looked like a path curving inward, like a loop pulling tight. He traced it slowly, chills prickling along his arm. If this was meant for him, then inheritance wasn't merely about ownership, but endurance. His father had carried the burden alone, and now, testing resolve meant proving he could do the same. He stood by the trapdoor again, sack still heavy with coins stacked inside. He realized he had gained nothing. No money exchanged, no debts paid, only more weight dragging him lower. Greed promised salvation, but instead offered chains. Somewhere beneath stone and silence waited that other chamber, hidden behind codes and symbols. The decision cut deep. Chase it or bury it. Legacy or freedom. When dawn streaked pale through cracked glass windows, he hadn't chosen. But he knew choice would come soon. Either the burden devoured him, or he mastered it. His resolve would decide which. He waited until the house felt still, until the night stretched far past his child's bedtime. Then he slipped back into the store, key clasped so tightly in his palm that ridges marked his skin. The coded page from the journal was folded in his pocket. Each glance at it teased directions, curves and blinds, suggesting a passage deeper than the one he already knew. He told himself this was about answers, about finally uncovering the truth hidden beneath generations. But another part of him knew greed had joined curiosity, whispering that something greater waited in the shadows. The trapdoor gave way with its usual groan, the air rushing upward, cold and metallic. As his boots hit the stone floor below, the silence welcomed him like a judge watching an unworthy intruder. He raised his flashlight, sweeping it across crates and coins, before turning toward the far wall where the coded drawing seemed to point. His eyes scanned each stone, each mortar seam. Then, along the base, marks etched faintly into rock answered the symbol on the page. Two circles joined, bisected by a single line. He pressed a palm against that section. At first, nothing stirred, until he pressed harder and felt give. A panel stone disguised as part of the wall shifting slightly under pressure. He pulled back, heart straining, then leaned in with both hands. Stone slid with grinding protest, scraping echoes across the chamber. Behind it gaped a slit barely wide enough for a body to pass. A passage. Dust spilled out like ash, thick against his throat, but he forced himself forward. The corridor sloped down, stone walls tightening close. He crouched, scraping shoulder against rough edges, light bouncing erratically. The air grew damper, sharper, and he tasted minerals on his tongue. A ladder had been a choice in the first chamber. This felt different, purposeful, built for secrecy rather than storage. He realized whoever carved this did not want it stumbled upon. They wanted effort, persistence, a test. His father had preserved that burden with silence, perhaps trusting only someone stubborn enough to decipher codes might continue. That realization didn't comfort him. It only reminded him how far his father's shadow reached. At last the crawl space widened and dropped into a second chamber, smaller but stranger. The flashlight revealed walls carved finer than crude stone blocks. Murals stretched across them, faded pigments tracing layered scenes. Figures bent under loads of treasure. Lines of people passed objects hand to hand toward a central figure shrouded in cloak and shadow. Eyes hovered above them, carved as circles within circles, repeating ominously. He stepped slow, scanning, every line tugging his mind toward history he couldn't place. At the center of this deeper room stood a pedestal of black stone, smooth, unmarked by dust. Resting atop was an object cloaked in cloth gone brittle with age. He swallowed hard, circling once, breath shallow. The paintings along the wall seemed to bend toward this place, like pilgrims offering devotion. With reluctant hands, he peeled away the fabric. Beneath shimmered a fragment unlike anything he had seen. A disk made of metal neither gold nor silver, etched with patterns radiating like sunbursts. The carvings gleamed faintly even under weak flashlight beam, as though alive. He held it carefully, weight surprisingly light, almost delicate against the gravity he felt in his chest. Questions beat at him. Was this artifact why the treasure was gathered here? Was this disk the core his father never mentioned, the true inheritance carried in silence? He turned it slowly and noticed markings that mirrored those etched near the floorboards upstairs. His child's innocent discovery linked directly to this moment. He froze, considering. The generations before had hidden wealth, maps, journals. But this object stood different, resonant, almost sacred. He imagined choices. To take it meant keeping a symbol of immense significance, but also bringing danger home. To leave it meant safeguarding legacy, but binding himself to secrecy forever. The murals along the wall seemed to pronounce judgment, lines of faceless watchers etched deeper than any coin or crate had implied. He understood then what his father may have known. Inheritance is less about gain and more about responsibility. This disk was not treasure to hoard. It was a test of who he chose to be. Breathing ragged, he lowered the disk back upon its pedestal and drew the brittle cloth over again. His hands trembled. He longed to carry it upstairs, show his child, prove that worth existed beneath worthless floors. Yet something in him resisted. Taking it would mark them both. Leaving it preserved them at least a little longer. He turned to go, every step heavy with the weight of leaving behind what might change everything. The crawl back through narrow passage felt longer, stone scraping skin, until he burst once again into the first chamber. Coins glittered, indifferent. Crates loomed, silent. He replaced the panel stone behind him with effort, sealing the path so crudely it almost looked untouched. No one else must find the way. Not yet. As he climbed the ladder, his thoughts turned to his child's face, trusting eyes too young to carry such burdens. That decided him more than fear or greed. Back on the store floor, he sealed the hatch again, dusting boards as earlier, hands raw. He sat, slumped against counterwood, heartbeat pulsing still from the chamber. The artifact's image refused to fade, spiraled metal with radiance cut into it. He knew he would carry that vision forever, whether he kept it hidden or not. For now, he had chosen preservation, but deep inside lingered nagging dread, because choices made in silence never stay secret. The watcher at the door, the footprints in dust, all hinted others searched too. And once they discovered there was more than coins below, something older, something sacred, no boards or keys would keep them from trying to claim it. The knock came again, harder this time, rattling glass in its frame. He froze mid-breath, fingers pressed flat to the counter edge, and felt cold dread bleed down his spine. His child slept upstairs, in a room no more than 10 feet above the hidden chamber, completely unaware of the danger pushing at their door. He had hoped that shadow figure would fade into memory, but now, with each measured pound on the glass, hope thinned to breaking. The voice arrived next, low and steady. "I know what you're guarding." No sales pitch this time, no pretended interest, just blunt certainty. His chest tightened. He moved to the door slowly, not opening, only listening. "Let me in or I'll come in my own way." The man continued, tone smooth, yet threaded with threat. He stepped back, panic heating his pulse. Fight was impossible. Run was reckless. His only weapon was wit. He turned quietly, climbing stairs to check on his child. Curled in blankets, safe for now. He whispered a silent promise and slipped back down, resolve hardening like stone. If confrontation came, he would not cave easily. Minutes stretched, then glass shuddered again from deliberate strike. The man had grown tired of waiting. The single dad slipped behind the counter, slid open a drawer, and grabbed the iron key. Fate or chance, this sliver of metal had guided every step until now, and it might hold last answers, too. He hurried to the west wall, pushed crates aside. Boards lifted away under his frantic hands. The hatch yawned open with stale air rushing upward. He descended fast, shutting it behind him, praying the intruder would not notice until too late. In the glow of his flashlight, the chamber seemed both sanctuary and trap. Coins glimmered accusingly, crates huddled like witnesses. A scraping overhead signaled the door upstairs had been forced. Heavy boots entered the shop. Dust rained down as weight pressed across boards. He pulled breath shallow, clutching the key, and forced himself deeper still. At the far wall, he slid aside the stone panel and squeezed through the crawl space, shoulders scraping raw. He carried only the light, leaving treasure untouched, praying silence cloaked him. The second chamber welcomed him with its murals and the pedestal cloaked in brittle cloth. He kept the beam low, careful not to invite attention through cracks. Yet already echoing footsteps filtered faint through stone above, then closer, descending the ladder. His heart raced. The intruder knew the hatch. He must have searched long before claiming to buy the store. Now he was inside, boots striking stone as he entered the first chamber. He crouched low near the artifact, considering desperate options. Flight was cut off. Crawl passage would trap him if cornered. Fight was impossible against a man larger, likely armed. That left deception. He eyed loose crates, glints of coin, scattered trinkets. A plan flickered, raw and risky. The intruder's light flared as he swept into the deeper corridor. His shadow thickened along murals, voice echoing, "You shouldn't have meddled." This was never yours alone. The dad's grip tightened on the flashlight. "And yet you waited until now," he answered, words trembling but clear. "If it belonged to you, Why hide in shadows? The man sneered, stepping closer, eyes reflecting pale shine. Because only fools reveal hands too soon. You had what I needed, access, bloodline. Now it's open, and you're dispensable. His gaze slid to the pedestal, where fragile cloth draped the disk beneath. Greed widened his features. Give it to me. Fear burned across the single dad's gut, but fear sharpened him. He moved sideways toward a crate he had loosened earlier, flipping it open enough for coins to scatter loud across the floor. Metallic clinks ricocheted through chamber. You want treasure? Take it. He hurled handfuls toward the intruder, showering him with distracting glimmers. The man laughed darkly, but bent, unable to resist, scooping greedy fists of coin. In that heartbeat, the dad seized the cloth-covered disc, but instead of revealing it, he slipped the brittle wrapping off and tossed it aside. With quick motion, he wrapped another heavy, lidless plate from a broken crate, a worthless shard disguised. Sliding it onto the pedestal, he replaced the cloth, making illusion nearly seamless. Then he pressed the true disc flat against his chest under coat, heartbeat booming against ancient metal. The intruder turned back, suspicion narrowing his eyes. You touched it, he accused. The dad shook his head. I guarded it, same as my father guarded it before. It's never leaving this room. He forced conviction into words, though sweat slid cold along his back. The man stepped closer, snarling now, hand darting out to rip cloth away. Revealed lay the decoy plate. His face contorted, greed blossoming into triumph. Finally, he whispered, cradling false artifact like sacred prize. The dad stepped backward, pressing near-crawl passage. His plan teetered. One wrong move would expose truth, but blissful ignorance painted the intruder's gaze. He tucked plate beneath arm and barked, Stay down here if you want. I have what I came for. With that, he turned toward ladder, greed dragging him up into darkness above. The dad slumped, knees buckling. Relief and terror roared together in his chest. He had preserved the real inheritance through deception, but risk was not over. He crawled quickly back through the passage, sealed stone behind, and then climbed into first chamber. Light, faint above, marked intruder, leaving hatch open carelessly, boots retreating. The dad waited until silence smothered again before clamping door tight. Boards pressed heavy across top. Sweat stung eyes. Heart thudded ragged. He crept upstairs at last and checked his child's room. Still asleep, breathing steady. He pressed hand against small back and felt tears threaten. Tonight could have stolen everything, but cleverness bought them safety. At least for now. Back down in store, he clutched hidden disc still against chest. Its weight now carried more meaning than gold. He'd given away decoy, but true core remained with him. Reckoning had come, and choice defined him. Not greed, not cowardice, but defense of legacy and child above all. He realized with unsteady breath that survival was not about treasure. It was about outwitting shadows that stalked him. And though danger had not vanished, tonight proved he could stand against it. Clever, desperate, but unbroken. Morning light spilled through the dusty front windows, painting the old counters in pale gold. He had barely slept, yet he felt sharpened by decision. The chamber below had been sealed overnight, heavy boards and dust once more disguising the hatch as nothing more than warped flooring. Above ground, only the quiet store remained, ordinary to anyone passing by, and that was the way it needed to stay. What lay beneath was not meant for display. It was legacy, test, and burden all at once, and it was safer buried under silence. He stood in the storefront with shoulders sagging, the disc pressed close beneath his jacket. Its weight felt strange, light in hand, but immense against his soul. He thought of handing it to museums, collectors, or even those shadow watchers who circled the building. But each scenario ended in his child left vulnerable in ways no money could fix. So he chose differently. He found an old cash box from behind the counter, stared at its empty tray for long moments, then lifted one coin, just one, from the sack he'd assembled. He placed it inside, closed the lid, and slid it onto a high shelf. A token reminder, proof to himself that what he had seen was no fevered dream. The true disc, though, he wrapped carefully in cloth and carried to his bedroom, tucking it deep into a drawer beneath layers of clothing. It would remain close, a private anchor of meaning. When his child came bounding in that afternoon, eyes bright despite the gloom of the store, he smiled more honestly than he had in weeks. His chest eased at the simple sound of their laughter, the chatter about school and drawings and questions, utterly separated from tunnels or treasure. That was the point, he realized. It was their innocence he wanted to protect, not crumble under the heaviness of secrets. Together they tidied a few shelves, stacking worthless stock upright, brushing dust off forgotten jars. To outsiders, it might have looked pointless, reviving a store no one wanted to shop at. But to the dad, the act carried a new meaning. Every sweep of broom, every cleared corner, was not about profit, but presence. The store had been curse, then puzzle, then trap. Now it was something else, a shelter that disguised their future, a relic of safety disguised as ruin. At times he caught himself staring toward the west wall, mind drifting toward the sealed hatch. But then his child would tug at his sleeve, asking for help drawing a new sign in bright marker. Our store. The letters were crooked, but they drew them together, hearts lighter in that small shared act. The world outside would never know what truly lay beneath, and that ignorance cloaked them in peace. Nights grew calmer in simple routines. Supper together, bedtime stories, laughter at small jokes. Sometimes, though, the dad sat awake after the house quieted, staring at the drawer where the disc slept. He would picture murals bending toward cloaked figures. Imagine what it meant to those who carved them. Maybe they had feared the same shadows that haunted him. Maybe they too chose to preserve rather than flaunt. In those moments, he felt kinship with ancestors whose names he didn't know, linked by silent vow. Guard, not squander. Still, he knew danger had not vanished. Footsteps might one day echo again outside, knocks return with heavier fists. He understood the intruder would realize the artifact he carried away was a forgery, and suspicion would circle back to this shop. That time might come, but for now, peace lingered, fragile but real. Each shared breakfast with his child was a victory. Every sunrise that arrived without knocks on glass was grace. On a clear evening, he pulled down the shutter halfway and stood with his child just outside. The building looked ordinary again, even pitiful compared to polished storefronts down the block. His child squeezed his hand and said, "I like it here. It looks like ours now." The words tightened something inside him, but in a good way. He knelt, pulling them close, whispering, "It is ours, no matter what it looks like." For the first time, the store didn't feel like curse or chain. It felt like foundation, something to build upon, not for money, but for meaning. Legacy had changed definition. It wasn't coins or medals or hidden chambers anymore. It was this moment, standing together, claiming a future despite the shadows. The treasure below could rest indefinitely, sealed by wood, stone, and choice. Above, the true wealth laughed freely at his side, eyes bright and unburdened. The worthless store was no longer worthless. It became priceless, not because of gold or discs or journals, but because it was theirs, a stage on which they could face tomorrow. He didn't know what dangers might come, or what choices might test him further. But for tonight, certainty returned in simplest form. Love outweighed greed, presence outweighed secrets, and survival meant staying by his child's side. As twilight settled over them, he closed the shutter, turned the key, and pressed his palm against cold metal for a quiet beat. He whispered a thank you, not to his father, not exactly, but perhaps to the strange twist of fate that forced burden into blessing. Then he walked upstairs, child laughing ahead of him, leaving dust and shadows behind. Because some inheritances you hide, others you carry openly, and the truest ones live not in vaults, but in the people who need you most. Subscribe for more strange, uncanny stories unfolding in ordinary places.